Hi, I'm David Harmon. I'm with my partner Keith Cook, and we're with RE/MAX in Whatcom County. And we're going to get into lease options, or rent-to-owns, as some people say, or option to purchase. There's variable ways to say it, but really it comes down to what we call lease options. And so, stick with us. We're going to get into this in depth.
Yeah. Is a lease option right for you, or owner contract, or note and deed of trust, or promissory note? This one is on how a lease option or rent to own will work out. So hope you like it. The lease option. How do you like the lease option?
I think lease options are fantastic, given given what you're trying to purchase and what your end goal is. And as a seller, it does give an option. Say you're renting a house, or your lease option on a house. Generally, what you're going to do is pay a little bit more than the market rent, and then that percentage, say it's an extra $400 a month, that money is going to compile over, say, 5 years, and then you can use that money as closing costs towards the purchase of the house, and your contract's going to state in there that at the end of that period of time that you have the option to purchase it.
And a lot of times that's associated with a lease or a rental agreement. So it's a lease with option to purchase. Sometimes we get referred to as rent to owns. And so the scenario where these work great for a seller is if they're negative on equity. And for that to say, let's just say your house is worth $300,000 and you owe $350,000. You moved out of town. If you sell it, you're going to have to come up with $50,000. And so what are we going to do? Well, if you find a buyer who can make those, so you have a mortgage, right? So if they can make that mortgage payment for you and take responsibility and ownership of the property, that's a great situation. Now it's just figuring out, what does the price have to be in order to clear title to sell it to them? So if you're saying, all right, I'm okay without really getting much equity, I just want to not jack up my credit, what can I do? Well, the lease option is putting someone in there who will make that payment. So that scenario goes making sure that the loan's not in default, or if the loan is in default, having the buyer come up with enough money to hopefully cure that default. So we've had them in the past where sellers missed a couple of payments. The buyer on a lease option is coming in with some money. They are going to have an equity interest in the property, not necessarily as much as down as an owner contract, or the seller situation isn't going to work for an owner contract. So usually there's two scenarios where it's not going to work for the owner contract. The benefit for the buyer saying, all right, if it's only worth $300,000, why am I paying $350,000? Well, if you go Google real estate historic charts and see what happens with real estate, and if you're going to be paying for rent anyways, why not have the option to buy something? Because you're going to have the right to close on that. So who's to say it's not worth $450,000 in 5 years? Do you want to still be renting, or do you want to have the potential to say, yeah, I'd like to tie into some of that extra equity? How to deal with it in 5 years if you either to purchase it or you're going to work with the seller together. It's a little bit more living, breathing what's going on, because both parties are still trying to work out what works best for both of them. So it's a little unique. If there is a loan, a lot of times you need to check with your lender. There's going to be something called a due on sale clause, that if you're in a contract that's for too long of a period, that may generate something. So there's sometimes risk associated with that. Whether you record something, a lot of times, just like if a sale, you may want to record something just so that you know there is an interest in there. It can work great for the buyer. So say you did that transaction, now it's worth $450,000 in 3 years. So how would that work? You can either go and just close on it. You're going to have three elements of the agreement. You're going to have a purchase and sale agreement. You're going to have an option to purchase agreement, and a rental, a lease option, or a rental agreement. So you just go in, turn it to the bank and say, all right, I'm ready to close, and you're ready to close on it. And there's some things that can actually happen that are beneficial too, depending on the monthly payment that you're having. Like Dave was saying, how much of the rent might go towards the purchase price. So let's just say if we look at, you have to look at what fair market rent is. So if the fair market rent is $1,200 a month, then you're paying $1,600 a month, then $400 a month credit that we can put into the contract. So you're getting that towards your closing costs or down payment. So at the end of the year, you got $4,800 towards the down payment, or $9,600 after 2 years. And if that's what it takes to make the sale come together, you've kind of had a forced savings account, and the lender's going to look at that.
And it's one of the tools that we use in our toolkit when, like in a seller situation, say we do a market analysis on a property and figure out what their value is. And maybe it comes back at 250 and the seller really wants 300. Well, an option would be to offer at lease option because somebody is willing to pay more if the terms are right. So it's a great tool for a seller that's trying to get more for the property, just to open it up to the buyer pool with that option.
Sure. And again, each situation is different. And just looking like tax consequences or liability, how long was the property rented? Was it ever owner occupied? Because if you're taking an owner occupied property and then not selling it for 5 years, there's some stipulations on how long you had to live in the home. So did it make sense versus renting versus just selling it or optioning? So each situation is a little bit different, but in theory, it can be a savior for buyer and seller. Can be a really cool situation if it's the right situation. And it's just like being aware of what situations that are out there that potentially could work. I think I've seen it work great for people, like I said, who are upside down, who have negative equity and they want to deal with it. It could work great for a seller who's like retiring and may not want to sell for tax purposes for a certain amount of time, to say, all right, I'll sell it to you, but I really don't want to be cashed out for a year and a half because of my IRA coming in, or when it kicks in, you're starting to get in Social Security, or just making sure that you're set up. So if there's a reason for a delayed closing, why have the property sit there empty for a year and a half when you can actually be creating rent and having someone else be responsible for everything? Because you can put like a provision in the agreement that it's treated like a sale. So the tenant / buyer would do their inspections up front. It's treated like a sale, sign off on the disclosures. They know exactly what they're getting into. And at that point, in my mind, the contract should be the tenant can do repairs to the property and maintenance. Let's just say the hot water tank goes out on the 4th month after the transaction, the tenant's taken occupancy of the property. In my mind, I say that tenant, if the hot water tank goes out, call the plumber. Don't call the property owner, because the contract's going to say you are taking responsibility for it. Mm-hmm. Just like if you want to go put new paint or new carpet and actually increase the value, instead of $450, now it's worth $650. If there's a way for you to force value on it, then that's on you. But you've got a contract. Usually they're going to be assignable, so either you close on it or someone else, and that's you control that property for the next 5 years. Let's just say a situation where you're in a contract, we're saying $350, 2 years down the road, the seller says, hey, I got someone that'll pay $1 million for the property. That's not the seller's $1 million. That is, they have to work with the tenant, because the tenant has a contract. So the seller just can't go sell it to anyone else willy-nilly. Typically, again, look at attorneys and look at everything, unless there's escape clauses, and depending on how the contract is, we're talking generally. So what does it take to start a lease option, Dave?
Contract.
There you go. It's kind of a combination. It's really a hybrid. So you're going to have all of your traditional rental agreements. So you're going to have the rental agreement when it's due, all of that stuff. And this is all negotiable, but what in my mind it's going to take is all of your rental agreement and a whole purchase and sale agreement. So all of your contingencies, everything that you want in a purchase and sale agreement. And then we're also going to add in an option to buy, which would be giving you the right to close on a future date. We'll have all of the disclosures for the rentals, all of the disclosures for the sale. We'll have the title policy. So we'll have everything ready to go. We'll deal with the insurance companies. You want to have attorneys review it. So it's all set up and legit. There's just a lot more paperwork that gets involved, because we're almost doing like 3 contracts at once. It's all the same parties and the same property. You could anticipate from a borrower wanting to provide the seller with your credit report and tax returns, possibly a financial statement, just making sure they're going down the track with someone you'd want it to deal with. From the borrower standpoint, you look at the title report, looking at a home inspection. I think it's important to get a home inspection, because the contract most likely is going to have the clause in there that once you move in, you're responsible for the repairs. So if you want to negotiate any of that, it seems to know what you have up front. Plus, it always makes sense to have an inspection, because if you were to go down the road. You don't want to put a bunch of money into something and then find out a different system fails. So we've seen that before where you're not aware of one system and it fails. And it's a lot of money to get repair guys out or fix stuff nowadays. But all in all, given the situation, lease option's not going to be great for everyone or perfect for everyone. But given that situation and what the possibilities are for someone, I think it could be great. Like we've had some people who they may not qualify for 2 years. So from a buyer standpoint, we would like you to talk with a lender because we don't want to get you in a lease option and only find out you don't qualify down the road. So we should be knowing where you're going to qualify to. So if you're going to say qualify for $350,000 or $550,000, whatever the number is, so have you talked to the bank right now? What they would do would say, all right, based on your current income and salary and what it's going to take at the point of sale, here's what needs to happen between now and the end of your contract. What's going to happen? So, which is a little hard to project because interest rates move, which affect numbers, but there could be some credit issues to work on. There could be some down payment issues to work on. They may have some ideas actually even how to structure the contract as far as how much of a closing cost that the seller would be allowed to pay of that. And that could be part of the contract and the option. So there's a lot of massaging or understanding, but we like to preload it, do as much work ahead of time. So when we get to that point of closing, it's not like they're off. And it's like, well, I don't qualify for this amount. Why did I do all of this? We want to make sure that you're in a position to close just for your own protection, or at least know where you're at, because sometimes it might be a risk on a huge risk. So an option to purchase is separate from a first right of refusal. So sometimes I think I get that number thrown in there too, where there's a provision in the contract with a tenant that something could happen in the future. So an option gives you the control, the tenant to close on it per the contract, but usually the tenant has an option to exercise exercise the purchase. If it's a first right of refusal, then that's going to set off a different chain of events, which basically means that your agreement has a right to match another agreement. So that's not the same. So if we have an option and I agree to buy this pencil from you for $1, I have an option. I got 5 years to buy the pencil. That's great. What a first right refusal would be, that's your pencil. I'm borrowing it and someone else gives you an offer on it. I've got the right to match it. So someone says they'll give you $1.10 for that pencil. Now I got to pay $1.10. I get the first right to it to match it, but I don't get, that's not the dollar. That's the difference on an option versus a first right of refusal.
All right. Thanks for sticking with us and learning all about lease options. Pretty intense stuff there. Make sure to like and subscribe our page. And if there's something that you'd like to see, comment below or just tell us how good of a job we did. We like that. Thanks.